The mystery of medieval sleep. Have you ever wondered if people in the past slept the same way we do today? You know, lying down at night, sleeping straight through until morning, waking up to an alarm and starting another busy day. We take this pattern for granted, as if it's the only natural way humans have ever slept. But what if I told you that this modern version of sleep, one long, unbroken block, is actually a very recent invention? That for thousands of years, human beings didn't sleep once per night, but twice? This isn't fantasy. It's history, and it reveals one of the strangest forgotten truths about how our ancestors lived. In this episode, we're stepping back into the Middle Ages, into a world without electricity, without screens, and without clocks dictating every hour, to uncover the mystery of segmented sleep, a rhythm that once shaped every night of human life. Imagine Europe 600 or 700 years ago. The streets are dark, lit only by flickering torches or the glow of a hearth. The day ends early because sunlight rules everything. When the sun disappears, the world slows down. After dinner, people say their prayers, tell a few stories, and then, around 8 or 9 in the evening, most households settle down to sleep. But here's the twist. They don't sleep until morning. They sleep for about 4 hours, what they call their first sleep. And then, around midnight or so, they wake up. Yes, wake up. Not by choice, not because of insomnia, but naturally. For 1 or 2 hours in the middle of the night, the medieval world quietly comes alive again. People get up to tend the fire, pray, read, or even visit neighbors. Some use the time for reflection or writing. Married couples often use it as an intimate, private moment before returning to bed for their second sleep until dawn. To us, this sounds strange, almost alien, but for medieval people, it was as normal as brushing your teeth before bed. Historians discovered references to first sleep and second sleep in letters, diaries, literature, and even medical books from the 14th to 18th centuries. The historian Roger E. Kirk, who spent years studying this phenomenon, found hundreds of examples across Europe. In one 15th century diary, a farmer casually wrote, "I woke from my first sleep and went to check the animals." Shakespeare mentions it in his plays, and physicians of that era advised people on what to do after the first sleep. This wasn't folklore, it was a documented way of life. So why did they sleep like this? The answer lies in light, or rather the absence of it. Before the invention of electric bulbs, nights were governed by firelight, moonlight, and darkness. Human bodies are deeply tied to natural light cycles. Without artificial light extending the day, people's biological clocks, their circadian rhythms, followed the sun. When darkness fell, the body produced melatonin earlier, making people sleepy. But around midnight, a natural lull in melatonin occurred, gently waking them. Their bodies used this time to rest, think, pray, and then drift back into deeper sleep. It wasn't a disorder. It was balance. In the stillness of medieval nights, that quiet period between the two sleeps had a meaning of its own. It was a time of peace, reflection, and connection. In some communities, people believed it was a sacred hour, when dreams could be remembered, prayers were more powerful, and even divine inspiration could strike. The night wasn't something to rush through. It was something to experience. If you could walk through a medieval town at midnight, you wouldn't find it completely silent. You might see a faint candle flicker behind a window, hear low voices from a nearby house, or the distant sound of someone tending their animals. The darkness was intimate, not empty. It was alive with small moments of thought and feeling. People didn't fear waking up. They expected it. Now compare that to us. We live surrounded by light, blue screens, lamps, street lights blazing through the night. Yet we've never struggled more with sleep. We talk about insomnia as if it's a modern epidemic. We buy blackout curtains, melatonin pills, sleep apps, and smartwatches that measure how efficient our rest is. And still, we wake up tired. Maybe the real problem isn't that we're sleeping less, but that we've lost touch with how humans were meant to sleep. In the medieval world, sleep wasn't mechanical. It was flexible, emotional, and communal. People rested when their bodies wanted to rest. They woke when their minds were ready to wander. The boundary between night and day wasn't strict. It breathed. There was space to think, to feel, to dream. Today we treat sleep like a chore, a block of time squeezed between work and deadlines. They treated it like a rhythm, a conversation with the night. The turning point came with the rise of artificial light and the Industrial Revolution. When cities began installing street lamps in the 17th and 18th centuries, people stayed awake later. The natural rhythm of darkness and light began to blur. Factories in the 19th century demanded strict schedules. 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, 8 hours of something else. Sleep became compressed, standardized, and eventually one solid block became the modern norm. We stopped listening to our bodies and started obeying the clock. But that clock cost us something. It stole our quiet hour, that gentle middle-of-the-night moment when the world is silent and the mind is free. We traded it for efficiency, but maybe we lost a little peace in the process. So, the mystery of medieval sleep isn't just a story about the past. It's a mirror held up to the present, a reminder that our ancestors might have known something we've forgotten. They lived slower, slept softer, and listened more closely to the rhythm of life around them. As we end this first chapter, take a moment tonight to imagine what it might feel like to wake in the middle of the night. Not to reach for your phone, but to simply sit in the dark and breathe. That silence, that stillness, that pause between dreams, it once belonged to every human being. In the next episode, we'll step deeper into that world, exploring what the medieval night actually looked like, how people lived after sunset, and why the darkness was far from empty. Until then, sleep well, and maybe, just maybe, dream like it's the Middle Ages again.
Life after sunset, the medieval night world. When the sun dipped below the horizon in the Middle Ages, the world changed completely. Life after sunset wasn't just darker, it was slower, quieter, and in many ways, deeper. To us, night is a continuation of the day. We turn on lights, open screens, and carry on as if nothing has changed. But to medieval people, the setting sun marked the true divide between two worlds, the bright and the hidden, the waking and the dreaming. As daylight faded, a different rhythm took hold, one that shaped how they lived, worked, and even slept. Without electricity, light was a precious thing. The only sources came from fire, moon, and stars, and each carried its own mood. In great halls or cottages, the flicker of a single candle could shape the entire space. Shadows stretched long and soft, turning familiar rooms into mysterious caverns. The fire was the heart of the home, its glow both comfort and protection. People gathered around it to eat, tell stories, and pray before the embers dimmed. The night outside was another matter, vast, silent, sometimes frightening. For peasants, the countryside after dark could feel endless. It sounds strange and alive, the cry of an owl, the rustle of unseen animals, the sigh of the wind through trees. But the medieval night wasn't only about fear. It was about community, faith, and reflection. After sunset, when work in the fields or workshops ended, people turned inward, toward family, toward spirit, toward imagination. The first few hours of the evening were lively. In small villages, neighbors might gather in one home to share tales, sing songs, or gossip by firelight. Storytelling was one of the great communal arts of the age, carrying history, morality, and humor through generations that could not read. A traveling bard or minstrel might pass through, bringing music from distant lands. Even the poorest homes found warmth in voices, laughter, and shared bread before the night's first sleep began. Outside, in towns and cities, darkness had a different tone. Streets were narrow, often unlit except for a few torches or lanterns hung from doorways. After the curfew bell rang, usually around 9, most people stayed indoors. Traveling at night could be dangerous. Thieves, drunkards, and stray animals roamed freely. Guards patrolled the streets, calling the hours, their lanterns glowing like tiny stars in the mist. Yet even here, not everyone slept early. Inns and taverns stayed alive a little longer. Merchants discussed trade by candlelight. Scholars studied in monasteries, and healers mixed herbs for patients who came knocking after dark. The medieval night was not empty. It simply belonged to fewer people. For those who were awake in the late hours, monks, guards, bakers, mothers nursing infants, the night had its own rhythm. In monasteries, life followed strict order. Bells rang for prayers known as compline and matins, sacred rituals offered to honor God in the stillness between dusk and dawn. Imagine rows of monks in brown robes, their faces lit by soft candlelight, chanting Latin hymns that echoed through stone corridors. Outside, the world lay asleep, but within those walls time seemed suspended. These hours of darkness were thought to be holy, when human voices rose to meet the silence of creation itself. In villages, ordinary people also embraced smaller rituals of the night. After their first sleep, they might rise quietly to stir the fire, relieve themselves, or whisper a prayer. Some would check on animals or step outside to feel the cold air, guided only by moonlight. The moon, in fact, played a vital role in the medieval world. Its phases dictated farming schedules, festivals, even wedding dates. A bright full moon was called a light night, and people often used it to travel safely or work late into the fields. When the moon was new and the sky was black, the world felt smaller, more intimate, as if folded into itself. The night also shaped imagination. In the dark, with senses sharpened and vision dimmed, stories took life. People believed the boundary between the physical and the spiritual world grew thin after sunset. Ghosts, fairies, saints, and demons were said to wander the earth. Superstition wasn't just fear, it was a language of mystery, a way to explain what science had not yet named. If a candle flickered suddenly, someone might whisper that a spirit had passed. If a dog howled at midnight, it might mean an omen or a message from beyond. Night was both sacred and unsettling, a realm of possibility where dreams and reality met. And yet, despite these fears, the medieval night was a time of peace. With no clocks ticking, no phones glowing, and no engines humming, silence held a weight of its own. People lived within nature's rhythm, waking and sleeping with the sun, eating and working by its light and resting in its absence. The stars themselves became companions. On clear nights, the sky stretched endlessly, untouched by smoke or city glare. Travelers could navigate by the constellations, and poets found inspiration in the heavens. The night was not a void, it was a cathedral of stillness. For the poor, however, the night could also bring vulnerability. Fires cost money, candles were expensive, and windows rarely sealed well. In the cold months, people huddled under wool blankets or straw bedding, sharing body heat to survive the frost. Fear of fire kept many awake. A single spark could destroy a wooden house, so sleep was often light, broken, and practical. Yet even in these hardships, the night fostered connection. Families slept close, whispering in the dark, their voices carrying warmth that no fire could match. The more we look at medieval nights, the more we realize they were not empty hours between days. They were their own world. A world of shadows and whispers, prayers and dreams, danger and wonder. The night shaped people's souls as much as daylight shaped their labor. It taught patience, humility, and respect for the unseen. It made people listen to nature, to silence, to each other. Today our nights are bright and noisy, but in all that brightness something ancient has dimmed. We've lost the darkness that once taught humans how to rest, reflect, and reconnect. The medieval night reminds us that silence is not emptiness, it's space. It's time unfolding without rush, without pressure, without clocks. So as you imagine those centuries-old nights, the flicker of a candle, the distant echo of church bells, the soft murmur of families preparing for their first sleep, remember that this was the rhythm of life for generations. A rhythm guided not by schedules but by nature, not by alarms but by instinct. In the next chapter, we'll step even deeper into that world, to explore the strange and beautiful pattern of the two sleeps themselves, how they worked, why they mattered, and what happened during those quiet waking hours between them. Until then, let the lights dim and let the night breathe again. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, fully alert, for no apparent reason? Maybe you glanced at the clock, sighed, and tried to force yourself back to sleep, frustrated that you were awake when you shouldn't be. But what if I told you that moment, that natural awakening, was once completely normal, even expected? In the medieval world, that's exactly how most people slept. Not in one long stretch like we do today, but in two distinct periods, the first sleep and the second sleep. Between them lay a mysterious, peaceful interval, a quiet waking hour that connected the two halves of the night. This wasn't a rare habit or a superstition. It was a defining rhythm of medieval life. The pattern was simple but profound. After sunset, people would end their daily work, eat supper, pray, and then go to bed around 8 or 9 in the evening. They would sleep deeply for about 4 hours. This was their first sleep. Then, sometime around midnight, they would naturally wake up. Not because of noise or discomfort, but because their bodies told them to. They would stay awake for an hour or two, calm and unhurried, before drifting back to rest for their second sleep until dawn. This middle-of-the-night period was known in old texts as the watch or the midnight waking. For medieval people, it was not a disruption, it was a gift, a sacred pause. The mind was clear, the house was silent, and the night itself seemed to breathe. It was a time for prayer, reflection, or quiet conversation. In villages, faint lights might flicker from a few windows, a subtle sign that others, too, were sharing in the stillness. Historians have found hundreds of written references to this two-sleep pattern, in diaries, letters, and even literature. The historian Roger Ekirch, who studied sleep through the centuries, discovered passages describing first sleep and second sleep across medieval Europe. In one 15th century English diary, a man wrote casually, "I lay me down after my first sleep and said my prayers." In another account from France, a woman recorded waking after her first rest to read psalms before returning to bed. Even physicians from the period recommended activities for the time between sleeps, suggesting quiet prayer, intimacy, or light study to maintain health and spirit. It's fascinating how naturally the body adjusted to this rhythm. Without artificial light, the human circadian system responded purely to the cycles of the sun. When darkness fell, the body produced melatonin earlier in the evening, encouraging sleep soon after dusk. But around midnight, melatonin levels naturally dipped, gently waking people from their first slumber. After a short period of calm wakefulness, the hormone would rise again, leading to the second, deeper phase of sleep until morning. It was a biological dance perfectly in tune with nature's rhythm. What people did during that in-between time depended on who they were and what kind of night it was. In monasteries, monks would rise for matins, the midnight prayers, one of the sacred hours of devotion. By candlelight, they would chant psalms in Latin, their voices echoing softly against stone walls, while the rest of the world lay dreaming. In homes, peasants might tend to the fire, stir the coals, or step outside to check on animals. The moonlight guided their steps across frost-silvered courtyards or muddy paths. For couples, this quiet hour often became a time of closeness, both emotional and physical, before returning to rest. Writers of the era often described this middle-of-the-night period with reverence. It was a time when thoughts felt sharper, prayers more meaningful, and dreams easier to recall. Some even believed that the boundary between the physical and the spiritual world grew thinner during these hours, that the night opened itself to divine whispers. For those who prayed, it was an ideal moment to speak to God. For poets and scholars, an hour when the mind was clear enough to create or contemplate. The first sleep, in many ways, represented the body's rest, while the second sleep belonged to the soul. That in-between hour linked the two. It was a rhythm of balance, of activity and rest, light and dark, thought and dream. And this rhythm didn't just exist in Europe. Evidence of segmented sleep appears in ancient writings from many cultures, from medieval China to early Islamic scholars, and even in African and indigenous traditions. Everywhere humans lived without artificial light, this same pattern emerged. It was a universal language written into our biology. So what happened to it? Why did we stop sleeping this way? The answer lies once again in light, or rather our mastery of it. When candles became cheaper, when oil lamps became widespread, and eventually when gaslight and electricity illuminated the night, humans began staying awake later. Instead of sleeping soon after sunset, we extended our days artificially. Midnight was no longer a calm, sacred pause. It became the middle of our waking life. And as bedtime crept later, the two sleeps merged into one. By the 18th and 19th centuries, references to first and second sleep began to fade from diaries and medical texts. Industrialization reinforced the change. Factory schedules and fixed working hours demanded uniformity. 8 hours for work, 8 for leisure, 8 for rest. Sleep became a single block, compressed into efficiency. And that quiet, reflective hour between slumbers, the one that had existed for millennia, slowly disappeared from human experience. But traces of it still linger. Even today, many people naturally wake up in the middle of the night, often between midnight and 2 a.m., without knowing why. Doctors call it sleep maintenance insomnia, but perhaps it's not insomnia at all. Perhaps it's an echo of something ancient, a whisper from our ancestors reminding us of a forgotten rhythm. Imagine what it must have felt like to wake in a world without screens or noise, the only light a faint glow from the moon or the embers of a fire. To sit quietly in the stillness, listening to the wind outside or the breathing of loved ones nearby, to pray, to think, to simply be. That hour between sleeps wasn't a mistake. It was a moment of humanity, a bridge between the conscious and the dream. Modern science has even begun to rediscover its wisdom. Studies show that people deprived of artificial light for long periods naturally fall into a two-sleep pattern, mirroring medieval rhythms. In that middle waking phase, the brain produces high levels of prolactin, a hormone linked to relaxation and calm. In other words, it's one of the most peaceful states a human can experience. So maybe the mystery of the two sleeps isn't about the past at all. It's about balance. The medieval world, for all its hardship and superstition, still lived in sync with the earth's cycles in a way we've forgotten. Their nights weren't empty. They were full of thought, stillness, prayer, love, and dreams. As you drift to sleep tonight, think of those who came before you, the farmers, the monks, the mothers, the poets, all resting beneath the same stars, waking gently in the middle of the night to meet the silence. The night wasn't something to escape from. It was something to share. Perhaps it still can be. The sacred hour. What people did between sleeps. In the deep silence of the medieval night, when the fire's glow dimmed and the wind pressed softly against wooden walls, people stirred from their slumber. It was not from noise or fear, but from nature itself. Their eyes opened gently, their minds clear, their bodies still heavy with warmth. This was no strange occurrence to them. It was expected, almost sacred. They called it the hour between sleeps, the time of waking that divided the night in two. For them, sleep did not come in one unbroken stretch, as it does for us today. It came in two distinct parts, the first sleep and the second, and between them lay a quiet, precious interval, a time of thought, prayer, and intimacy, known simply as the sacred hour. In small cottages of timber and thatch, a soft rustle stirred through the dark. A man might reach for the poker to stir the embers in the hearth, watching the faint red coals bloom again into orange light. His wife might turn beside him, awake but unhurried, the sound of their breathing filling the stillness. Sometimes they would talk, low, gentle voices sharing memories, plans, or fragments of dreams. Sometimes they would rise and tend to the fire, mend a torn sleeve or check on the animals outside. The night air would be cold, the moonlight silver on frost or damp earth, but there was peace in it, a kind of calm that daylight never knew. This was their natural rhythm, their body's dialogue with the turning earth. In monasteries across Europe, the sacred hour was elevated to divine ritual. When the bells of matins tolled, monks would rise from their hard wooden beds, dress in simple robes, and gather in the chapel under a canopy of stars. The air would be cold, their breath misting in the dim candlelight as they began to chant psalms in Latin. Their voices rose and fell in echoing harmony, each syllable a prayer carried upward into the dark. In noctibus extulit manus vestras in sancta, et benedicite Dominum. Lift up your hands in the night and bless the Lord. For them, this hour was not an interruption of rest, but an offering of the soul. The darkness itself was holy, a space where silence met eternity. Outside the abbey walls, villagers shared their own form of devotion. Many would wake and whisper a short prayer before the hearth or by the bedside, believing that midnight was the hour when heaven's door stood open. The stillness of the world invited reflection, and even those who could not read or write found in that silence a form of wisdom. Some would meditate on their sins, others would thank God for the day that had passed, and some would simply listen to the night, the wind in the rafters, the distant howl of a dog, the ticking crackle of the fire. They did not see the dark as something to be feared, but as something to be respected, to be lived within. For couples, the hour between sleeps often became a time of closeness. After the first sleep, when the body was rested and the mind unburdened, conversation came more freely. Lovers spoke softly, hands finding each other beneath the blankets, hearts slower, gentler. The medieval physicians' texts even recommended these hours for affection and conception, believing that the body's humors were best balanced then, that love made in the quiet of midnight was blessed with peace. In this way, the sacred hour belonged not just to prayer, but to humanity itself, to warmth, tenderness, and the shared rhythm of life. Yet the night was not without its shadows. In many villages, people believed that the same hour which drew them close to God could also open the door to darker things. Stories were whispered of ghosts passing by candlelight, of witches wandering crossroads, of spirits that stirred when the world was half awake. Some kept charms or crosses by their beds, muttering prayers for protection before sleeping again. Even fear in its way was a kind of reverence, a reminder that they lived within a vast mystery, one that held both light and dark. As the hour waned, a drowsy calm would return. The fire sank lower once more, the coals whispering softly as the world slipped back into rest. The second sleep began, deeper and dream-filled, carrying them until dawn. Roosters would crow, light would spill through cracks in shutters, and another day would begin. But within that hidden hour before it, something timeless had taken place, something gentle and profound. For centuries this rhythm shaped every human life. Monks, peasants, merchants, mothers, all shared the same pattern of waking and resting beneath the same sky. It connected them not through clocks or calendars, but through nature's own pulse. And though we have forgotten it, the rhythm still lingers in our bones. Scientists now know that when people live without artificial light, they naturally fall into the same two-part sleep, waking for an hour in the middle of the night, calm and alert, before drifting off again. It is not insomnia. It is memory, the memory of how we once lived in harmony with darkness. Imagine that ancient world again, a village asleep under a clear, cold sky. A monk kneels in candlelight, chanting softly. A mother stirs the embers, while her children breathe steadily nearby. A farmer steps outside to look at the moon, his breath clouding in the night air. Somewhere two lovers whisper. And across the land, from stone abbey to humble hut, tiny flickers of firelight mark the presence of souls awake within the sacred hour. We no longer wake to the silence of that world. The hum of electricity has erased the pause between our sleeps. Midnight has become a time of labor, of distraction, of artificial brightness. But sometimes in the quietest nights, when sleep breaks for no reason, we might feel it again, that strange ancient stillness pressing close, as if time itself remembers. It is the same silence that once filled medieval rooms and cloisters, the same peace that turned the night into prayer. So the next time you find yourself awake at 1 or 2 in the morning, don't reach for the clock. Don't curse the interruption. Simply breathe. Listen to the quiet hum of your own heart. You are part of something old, older than industry, older than light, something that once united every soul under the stars. That is the sacred hour, the still bridge between dreams, where the body rests, the mind wanders, and the spirit, for a brief and gentle while, remembers how to be at peace with the dark. Science of sleep. What happens when we rest? When we close our eyes and drift into sleep, it feels like the world fades away. Yet within our bodies an extraordinary transformation begins. A quiet miracle that has shaped life since the dawn of time. Sleep is not the absence of activity. It is a different kind of awakening. While the conscious mind surrenders, the body enters one of its most intricate, carefully balanced states. For the medieval mind, this process was a mystery guided by divine rhythm. They believed the soul traveled through dreams and returned renewed. But today, through the lens of science, we know that what truly unfolds in those dark hours is one of the most complex biological symphonies known to humanity. Each night, our bodies journey through a sequence of stages known as the sleep cycle. It begins gently, as the brain slows its patterns and the muscles loosen. Heart rate decreases, breathing steadies, and the body's temperature drops slightly. A signal to every cell that it is time to repair and restore. This is the first stage, a fragile threshold between waking and rest, where even the faintest sound might pull us back to the world of light. The second stage takes us deeper, cutting ties with the day. Brain waves shift into slower patterns called spindles and K-complexes, bursts of electrical activity that help consolidate memories and regulate emotions. It is as if the brain begins to sweep its floors, clearing clutter, filing away the useful and discarding the unnecessary. Then comes deep sleep, the stage medieval physicians once described as the death of the senses. In truth, it is life's purest renewal. The body releases growth hormones, repairing tissues, building bone and muscle, and fortifying the immune system. It is during this time that wounds heal, strength returns, and the heart takes its well-earned rest. For a farmer in the Middle Ages, this stage might have begun just after the embers dimmed, when the world outside was silent, except for the slow breath of animals in the barn. Deep sleep was the body's workshop, and without it, fatigue, illness, and confusion would creep into waking hours. After a time, however, the stillness gives way to motion. The body stirs, eyes flicker behind closed lids, and the mind begins to dream. This is REM sleep, the most mysterious stage of all. Modern science shows that during REM, the brain becomes almost as active as when awake, yet the body remains paralyzed, as if nature itself has drawn a line between thought and action. Here memories fuse with imagination. The brain rehearses challenges, replays fears, and weaves emotions into strange symbolic stories. For medieval dreamers, this was the hour of visions, messages from God, omens, or glimpses of the soul's journey. Today we call it the mind's theater, where experience and creativity merge. Through the night this cycle repeats, from light sleep to deep, then to dreaming, about every 90 minutes. But it is not always equal. The early part of the night favors deep physical rest, while the later hours are rich with dreams. This is why broken sleep, or rising too early, often leaves us feeling heavy or incomplete. We have robbed the mind of its chance to wander and the body of its time to heal. The two-sleep pattern of the medieval world, with its waking hour in the middle, fit perfectly into this rhythm. Their first sleep contained the deepest restoration, while their second was lighter, filled with dreams and spiritual reflection. Unknowingly, they had aligned their nights with nature's hidden code. Scientists today map these patterns with precision. Brain waves charted in neon lines, heartbeats traced in quiet rhythm. Yet for all our technology, the essence of sleep remains profoundly human, profoundly mysterious. No machine can replicate its depth. It is a dance of chemistry and consciousness, of biology and emotion. The hormone melatonin begins the lullaby, rising as darkness falls, lowering body temperature, slowing thoughts. Cortisol, the herald of morning, waits patiently in the wings, ready to lift the curtain of dawn. Every heartbeat, every breath, every dream is part of this nightly script. When we sleep, memory becomes architecture. The day's fragments, words, images, lessons, and laughter are reassembled into understanding. The emotional centers of the brain quiet themselves, smoothing the rough edges of worry or grief. It is here that learning becomes wisdom. Without enough sleep, these processes falter. Medieval healers noticed that those deprived of rest became irritable, forgetful, and ill-tempered. Today, neuroscience agrees. Lack of sleep weakens the immune system, clouds the mind, and erodes empathy itself. Perhaps the most haunting truth is that sleep remains essential to our sense of self. Deprive a person of it long enough, and the mind begins to fracture. Reality blurs, thoughts turn strange, hallucinations whisper at the edge of vision. To medieval thinkers, this was the devil's trick. To modern scientists, it is a glimpse of how deeply our identity depends on rest. Sleep is the guardian of sanity. It is not passive. It is an active restoration of who we are. And yet in our bright, restless age we have forgotten this ancient wisdom. Artificial light floods our nights, tricking the brain into believing it is still day. Screens, noise, and worry steal the delicate balance our ancestors knew instinctively. We chase productivity deep into the hours once reserved for stillness. The sacred hour has become a scrolling hour. The darkness once filled with reflection now glows with blue light. But no matter how far we drift, the body remembers. Beneath the hum of technology, the same ancient rhythm beats. The slow pulse of sleep, the whisper of renewal. In the end, whether in a medieval cottage or a modern city, the miracle remains the same. When we rest, we return to the oldest rhythm of life, the rhythm that ties us to the earth's turning, to the rise and fall of breath, to the quiet intelligence of the body itself. Sleep is not the opposite of waking. It is its foundation. It is the night's soft alchemy, changing exhaustion into clarity, chaos into calm, day into tomorrow. So the next time you drift into dreams, remember, in that silent darkness, your body is not idle. It is writing the story of your renewal line by line, heartbeat by heartbeat. The same story that every human who ever lived has told in the ancient language of sleep. Technology, screens, and the new insomnia. Once upon a time, the night was a sacred space, a curtain drawn between one day and the next, filled with silence, shadow, and stars. But that world is gone. The night no longer belongs to sleep, nor to the soft rhythm of dreams. It now hums and flickers with light, a cold electric kind that never fades. We have conquered the darkness, but in doing so, we may have lost something ancient and irreplaceable, our peace. The same minds that once feared the darkness now fear the quiet, the stillness that comes when the world goes dark. In its place we have filled our nights with screens, tiny windows of light that keep us awake, connected and restless. Technology was meant to liberate us, to make life easier, faster, more efficient, and in many ways it has. But when it comes to sleep, the most natural act in the world, technology has done the opposite. We now live in a perpetual twilight, where the boundaries between day and night blur. Our eyes meet the glow of screens long after the sun has gone, our hands still tapping, scrolling, typing, as though the day never truly ends. The medieval peasant laid down his tools when the sky turned black. We instead carry our light with us, in our pockets, on our walls, in our hands, and that light, as science now reveals, is the very reason so many of us lie awake at night, staring into the dark, unable to rest. The human brain evolved under the rule of the sun and moon. For thousands of years our bodies followed that simple pattern. Light meant wakefulness, darkness meant rest. This cycle, the circadian rhythm, is written into our very cells. But the invention of artificial light changed everything. At first, it was candles and oil lamps, then gaslight, then the warm glow of the electric bulb. With each invention, we pushed back the night a little more. But in the 21st century, we have done something unprecedented. We have brought daylight indoors, 24 hours a day. Our homes, our streets, even our beds are bathed in the pale light of screens, the artificial dawn that never ends. Modern science tells us that this light, especially the blue wavelengths emitted by phones, tablets, and computers, directly interferes with melatonin, the hormone that tells the body it's time to sleep. When the eyes see blue light, the brain believes it is still daytime. It holds off on releasing melatonin, keeping the body alert, the heart rate steady, the mind awake. In essence, our devices have tricked our biology. We have become creatures of false daylight, our nights fractured by the glow of our own inventions. The result is what doctors now call the new epidemic, technological insomnia, a state of constant stimulation and shallow rest. It's easy to underestimate how deeply this change affects us. We think a late-night message or a few minutes of scrolling can do no harm, but those glowing moments accumulate. They pull us out of the rhythm our ancestors once lived by, the natural ebb and flow of light and dark. In the quiet of the medieval night, when the fire dimmed and the world hushed, people's minds slowed too. They listened to the creak of wood, the wind beyond the walls, the pulse of their own hearts. We, on the other hand, fill that same silence with noise, digital chatter, flashing images, endless streams of information. Our brains, bombarded by stimulation, cannot tell the difference between day and night anymore. The sacred hour has become the screen hour. There is a strange irony in this. The medieval world, bound by superstition and limited knowledge, still understood the need for balance between light and dark. They prayed by candlelight, then slept beneath true darkness. We, the so-called enlightened ones, have turned night into a second day. Our light is not warm or sacred. It is sterile and cold. Yet we depend on it. The screen has become our fire, our comfort, our distraction from solitude. And like the fire, it mesmerizes. But unlike the fire, it does not fade. It burns endlessly, inside our homes, our minds, and our eyes. This constant exposure changes us. Neuroscientists have discovered that people who use screens late at night experience delayed sleep cycles, reduced deep sleep, and poorer memory retention. The artificial light shifts our circadian rhythm forward. meaning we fall asleep later and wake more tired. Even when we do sleep, the brain remains semi-alert, disrupted by notifications or by the habit of vigilance that the digital world breeds. In medieval villages, people woke naturally in the middle of the night, spent an hour in reflection or prayer, and then slipped peacefully into their second sleep. Today, when we wake at 2 a.m., we reach for the phone. We scroll. We stimulate. We replace reflection with distraction, and the body never truly returns to rest. Some scientists call this sleep fragmentation, but it is more than biology. It is a spiritual fracture too, the disconnection between the self and the silence we were designed to dwell in. Medieval people found meaning in the night. We seek escape from it. They saw the stars as signs of divine order. We barely see them at all. Our windows are sealed, our skies drowned in light pollution, our attention captured by glowing rectangles that mimic the heavens. Yet they are only reflections, pale imitations of what we once knew. And this addiction to artificial brightness goes beyond the screen itself. The technology-driven culture around us rewards constant alertness. We are told to stay connected, productive, available. Sleep, once seen as sacred renewal, is now treated as a weakness, an obstacle to ambition. The world never stops, and neither do we. Our phones vibrate beside our pillows, our minds filled with half-finished thoughts, open tabs, and unseen messages. Even in bed, our thoughts do not lie down. The body might rest, but the mind keeps scrolling. In a way, we've redefined insomnia. It's no longer just the inability to fall asleep. It's the inability to disconnect. Medieval people lived within the limits of nature. Their lives rose and fell with the sun. Their nights were honest. We, by contrast, live in defiance of that simplicity. We've created a world that rewards sleeplessness, late-night productivity, endless consumption, constant engagement. And then we wonder why we are exhausted, anxious and numb. The truth is, we are not merely losing sleep. We are losing the ancient harmony between darkness and rest, silence and renewal. To understand how profound this loss is, imagine a medieval village again. The fire burns low. Outside, the stars shimmer like cold silver. The only sounds are a dog's distant bark, the soft breathing of sleepers, the creak of timber. The night belongs to stillness. Now imagine our own nights, the pale blue glow of a phone screen, the buzz of electricity, the restless movement of fingers and thoughts. The contrast is staggering. One world surrendered to the dark and found peace. The other fears it and fills it with noise. Yet there is hope. The same technology that enslaves our sleep can also help us reclaim it. Scientists now study the effects of blue light filters, night modes, and digital curfews, small ways to remind the brain of darkness again. Meditation apps, guided breathing, and digital Sabbaths are modern attempts to restore what medieval life had by default, a pause. Even artificial intelligence, the newest creation of human restlessness, is being turned toward understanding the old rhythms of sleep. The challenge is not to abandon technology, but to learn how to live with it, wisely, gently, in balance with our biology. Because the truth is simple. We cannot outsmart the body that nature built. We can ignore its signals, override its rhythms, and flood its senses with light, but the cost will always find us. Fatigue, anxiety, depression, these are not random afflictions. They are the voice of the body asking to be heard again. In medieval times, such suffering was attributed to sin or imbalance of humors. Today, we call it burnout. But the remedy may be the same in essence: restoration through rest, humility before nature's design. Perhaps what we truly crave is not more light, but more darkness. The kind of darkness that allows the mind to breathe, that silences the noise, that restores perspective. It was in darkness that monks prayed, that poets dreamed, that healers rested. It was in darkness that life renewed itself. We have mistaken brightness for wisdom, but wisdom, as the ancients knew, often speaks in whispers, and the night is full of them, if only we listen. So how do we return? How do we recover the sacred? Hour in a world that never sleeps? It begins not with grand gestures, but with small, deliberate acts. Turning off the screen an hour before bed, dimming the lights, allowing the body to feel darkness again, watching the moon, not the monitor, listening to the silence between breaths. In those moments, something ancient stirs, a recognition, a rhythm older than civilization itself. The body remembers what the mind has forgotten. Sleep, in the end, is an act of faith, faith that the world will still be there when we wake. The medieval sleeper knew this instinctively. They surrendered to the dark, trusting in dawn's return. We, by contrast, keep one eye open, afraid to miss something, afraid to fall behind. But nothing waits for us in that endless scrolling, only more wakefulness, more fatigue, more distance from ourselves. To rest is to remember that we are part of nature, not its masters. In the glow of our devices, we have recreated the stars, artificial constellations that we can hold in our hands. But no technology, no matter how advanced, can replace the real night sky, the quiet, infinite canopy under which humanity first dreamed. The medieval people, for all their hardship, still lived beneath that sky, still felt its rhythm in their bones. Perhaps that is what we are missing. Not sleep itself, but the world that allowed it. So tonight, when you turn off your screen, let the darkness return. Let it be unfamiliar, even unsettling. Sit in it for a moment. Listen to the hum of your own heartbeat. The silence is not empty, and it is alive. It is the same silence that wrapped the medieval world, the same darkness that cradled every dream before ours. And in that silence lies the cure to our modern insomnia. Not a pill, not a device, but a return to rhythm, to humility, to the forgotten wisdom of rest. We have built a world that never sleeps. But the human heart, ancient and unchanged, still beats to the rhythm of night and day. When we rest, truly rest, we step back into that eternal cycle. Technology may light our nights, but it cannot replace them. The darkness still waits, patient, forgiving, ready to receive us when we finally close our eyes. Dreams through the ages. Once upon a time, dreams were not just random stories of the sleeping mind. They were messages, whispers from gods, ancestors, or unseen spirits that shaped the destiny of kings and commoners alike. In the medieval world, to dream was to travel. The body might rest in darkness, but the soul wandered into sacred realms, heavenly visions, or even dark temptations. Sleep was not an escape from life, but a bridge to another form of truth. In monasteries, monks recorded their dreams as if chronicling divine revelations. Saints claimed to receive visions in their sleep, instructions from angels, warnings from the Virgin, or glimpses of paradise. Dreaming was sacred work, another kind of prayer. To close one's eyes was to open a window to eternity. The night, with its shadows and silences, became a cathedral where the soul met the unseen. In the flicker of a candle, a sleeper's stillness might be interrupted by revelation, a dream that could change the course of a life, a kingdom, or a faith. Among ordinary people, dreams were woven into the fabric of folklore. The farmer who dreamt of a broken plough feared famine. The mother who saw her lost child in sleep believed the spirit was calling from beyond. Dreams were maps of meaning, and interpreters were sought like prophets. Medieval dream books circulated from monastery to marketplace, promising to decode every symbol, from a crow in flight to a river running red. To dream was to step into a moral puzzle, a divine message hidden in metaphor. Yet not all dreams were holy. The Church warned that not every vision came from God. Some dreams, they said, were the work of demons, illusions sent to tempt or deceive the soul. The sleeping mind unguarded was vulnerable to sin. Nightmares were not dismissed as mere imagination. They were battles fought in the dark. To dream of falling, drowning, or burning was to glimpse hell's shadow. And so prayer became both shield and ritual. Before bed the faithful crossed themselves, whispered psalms, and invoked angels to guard their sleep. As centuries passed, the language of dreams began to change. The Renaissance brought curiosity, and the Enlightenment brought skepticism. The dreamer was no longer a vessel of divine will, but an explorer of the mind itself. Thinkers like Descartes and Locke began to see dreams as natural, not supernatural, the residue of thought, the echo of reason at rest. Yet even as science grew, the mystery of dreams endured. What was this strange theater of the mind that came alive in darkness? By the 19th century, dreams became a subject of study. The mystic's vision turned into the psychologist's experiment. Sigmund Freud, sitting in his study surrounded by the hum of Vienna's gas lamps, gave dreams a new language, the language of the unconscious. To Freud, the dream was a secret, a coded message from the deepest layers of the psyche. Every symbol, every image, every fear concealed a truth too uncomfortable for waking life. The dream became a confession, and the sleeper a witness to their own hidden desires. Carl Jung expanded this vision, suggesting that dreams connected not only to the self, but to humanity's collective memory. In dreams, he said, we met our ancestors again, not as ghosts but as archetypes, the hero, the mother, the shadow, the wise old man. Sleep was a journey through the timeless myths that lived within us all. Once again the dream was sacred, but now its temple was the mind itself. In the modern world, however, dreams have lost much of their power. We rush through our nights, our minds crowded with noise, our screens glowing until the last moment before sleep. The vivid landscapes of the imagination fade under the artificial light of waking life. Many no longer remember their dreams at all. Yet when we do, when we wake with an image so strange, so haunting that it lingers all day, we feel that same ancient wonder, a reminder that even in an age of reason and machines, mystery still visits us in the night. Science continues to study what our ancestors once prayed over. Modern neuroscience can map the dreaming brain, the surges of REM sleep, the flicker of the visual cortex, the pulse of memory weaving into narrative. We know that dreams help the brain process emotion, store memory, and even rehearse survival. The content may be strange, but the purpose is real. Dreams are the brain's nocturnal workshop, mending, sorting, creating. We dream not just for fantasies, but for balance. Yet there remains something unmeasurable. The medieval dreamer kneeling at dawn after a vision might not have known the word REM, but they understood reverence. They believed that dreams were messages worth keeping, fragments of a world beyond comprehension, and perhaps even now they are. For every dream that science explains, there are 1,000 that defy explanation. A face you've never seen, a place that feels familiar, a voice that echoes from nowhere. These are the reminders that the mind is far older, far deeper than we imagine. In some sense, dreams are the last bridge connecting us to the medieval night, that sacred time when sleep and spirit were one. We may not light candles before bed or pray for visions, but the act of dreaming still unites us with all who came before. Every night we return to that inner darkness where history, memory, and imagination meet. We drift across invisible landscapes, speaking a language without words, guided by something ancient and wordless. So perhaps to dream is to remember, not just our own past, but humanity's. In dreams, the peasant and the king, the monk and the scholar, the modern mind and the medieval soul, all share the same silent theatre. The night belongs to all of them, and to us. We close our eyes and history stirs again. The dream continues, eternal and unseen, weaving together every sleeper who ever lived. When dawn finally comes, and the light touches our eyelids, we awaken, not just from a dream, but into the long story of dreaming itself. The same mystery that haunted the ancients still lingers within us. We may give it new names, new theories, new devices to measure it, but its essence remains untouched. The dream is our oldest inheritance, a living connection to the dark, to the divine, to the deepest self. And perhaps that is why, no matter how advanced we become, we will always dream. Because dreaming is not a flaw of the human mind. It is its most profound creation. It is where reason sleeps and imagination wakes, where science meets spirit, where the medieval world and the modern one still touch. Work, time, and the tyranny of the clock. Before the ticking of clocks ruled the world, time itself was a living thing. In the medieval village, no one watched the hour. They watched the sky. The rising of the sun, the angle of shadows, the toll of the church bell, these marked the rhythm of life. Work began when the light returned and ended when it faded. The day belonged to nature, not to numbers. Time was circular, soft and human, flowing with the seasons, the harvest, and the heartbeat of the land. In that slower world, labor was bound to necessity, not precision. The farmer tilled until dusk because the earth required it. The blacksmith worked while the forge was hot. Even the monks, whose lives were regimented by prayer, followed the organic rhythm of sunrise and sunset. When the bell called them to matins or vespers, it was not the command of a machine but of faith, a spiritual pulse echoing through the hours. To sleep, to wake, to work, to rest, all these followed the body's natural order. No one managed time. They simply lived within it. But as centuries turned, something shifted. The industrial age arrived like thunder. The first machines demanded something that nature had never asked of us: exactness. The spinning wheels, the steam engines, the factory whistles, all depended on synchronization. Human hands had to move in unison with iron gears. For the first time in history, the clock, not the sun, decided when life began and when it ended. And from that moment, time ceased to be a rhythm. It became a ruler. The invention of the mechanical clock in the late Middle Ages was the spark. At first it seemed a marvel, an emblem of divine order mirroring the heavens. But as clocks spread from monasteries to towns, and from towers to workshops, they transformed into instruments of control. By the 18th and 19th centuries, every worker's day was divided into measured fragments. Bells and whistles replaced the natural cues of dawn and dusk. Time became currency, something to be spent, saved, or wasted. And soon sleep itself was treated as an inefficiency, an obstacle to productivity. Factories didn't rest, and neither did those who served them. The night shift was born, men and women laboring under gaslight, their bodies defying the old rhythms of day and night. The sacred boundary between work and rest began to crumble. In the medieval world, darkness had been a pause, a time for silence, intimacy, and dreams. In the industrial world, darkness became another shift. The human being became a cog in a vast, sleepless machine. The language of time changed too. The medieval peasants spoke of hours as gentle markers of the day. The modern worker began to speak of deadlines, schedules, and overtime. We built entire cities around the clock. Railway timetables, factory bells, office hours, all synchronized, all relentless. The clock tower became the new cathedral, its face gazing down like an unblinking god of order. The tolling bell no longer called souls to prayer, but bodies to labor. This new order promised progress, wealth, and efficiency, and it delivered all three. But it also brought something invisible: exhaustion. As the centuries marched on, the rhythm of the clock began to seep into our minds. We learned to measure our worth by our productivity, to equate rest with laziness, and to treat time not as life's companion but as its master. "Time is money," said Benjamin Franklin, a phrase that would have baffled the medieval farmer who knew time as a gift, not a debt. Even our bodies began to rebel. The constant ticking, the endless deadlines, the artificial pacing of work, all these clashed with our natural rhythms. The circadian cycle that once governed our sleep now struggles beneath electric lights and 24-hour shifts. Fatigue, stress, and burnout have become the modern plagues. We live longer but rest less. We have more hours on the clock, but fewer moments that feel truly alive. In the digital age, the tyranny of the clock has only deepened. The factory whistle has become the smartphone notification. The workplace has followed us home, glowing in our hands long after sunset. We measure not only our work hours, but our screen time, our productivity metrics, even our steps. The illusion of control has become total. Time itself feels accelerated, a blur of deadlines, meetings, and messages that never end. And the tragedy is that we call this progress. Yet if we look back, we can see that this obsession with time is new, not natural, not inevitable. The medieval person, though poor by our standards, possessed something we have lost: temporal freedom. Their hours were not chopped into minutes. Their work, though hard, had a beginning and an end. The night still belonged to sleep, and the body was not yet at war with the clock. It's worth imagining, just for a moment, a medieval village at dusk. The tools are set aside. The fields go quiet. Smoke rises from the hearths. The bell tolls for evening prayer, and the world slows down. There is no rush to answer a message, no anxious glance at a clock. The pace of life itself invites rest. Contrast that with the modern city: lights burning in glass towers, cars moving through neon streets, faces lit by screens long past midnight. The world turns faster, but the soul lags behind. We call ourselves timekeepers, but in truth time keeps us. We obey its tick like a commandment, forgetting that once we lived by rhythm, not regulation. Medieval people may not have known the science of sleep, but they understood something we've forgotten: that rest is sacred, not wasteful. That the body's cycles are not obstacles to productivity, but expressions of harmony with the world. To reclaim that harmony, we must first question the clock. Not to destroy it, for timekeeping has given us wonders, but to loosen its grip. We can begin by creating boundaries, where the machine world ends and the human world begins. By treating rest not as a luxury, but as an act of quiet rebellion, to sleep deeply, to pause without guilt, to let the body breathe outside of the schedule. These are small revolutions in a world enslaved by minutes, because the truth is simple and ancient. Time is not meant to be mastered. It is meant to be lived. The medieval bell and the modern clock both mark its passage, but only one allowed for stillness. The other demands motion without end. And until we remember the difference, we will remain restless, not from lack of time, but from our refusal to live within it. So tonight, when the clock strikes another hour, listen not to its command, but to the silence beneath it. The same silence that once filled the medieval night. The same rhythm that guided the peasant and the monk. It is still there, waiting. The heartbeat beneath the ticking, the life beneath the schedule. Time itself whispers, slow down, rest. The day will return in its own time, as it always has, rediscovering old rhythms. For thousands of years, humanity lived by rhythms older than civilization itself. The pulse of the earth, the turning of the seasons, the rise and fall of the sun. These were the clocks that guided every breath of life. People woke when the light crept over their fields, and slept when the fire burned low. They followed patterns written not by human invention, but by nature's own quiet laws. In the Middle Ages, life moved in circles rather than lines, a constant repetition of birth and decay, planting and harvest, dawn and dusk. Each day was a miniature version of the year, and sleep was one of its most sacred intervals. But somewhere along the way we drifted out of sync. The industrial age brought us new clocks, not the celestial kind, but mechanical ones, made of brass and gears. Time no longer belonged to the sun or the seasons. It belonged to the factory bell, the train schedule, the ticking of watches that measured not rhythm, but productivity. People no longer rose with the dawn, but with alarm clocks. Night was no longer a time for rest and reflection, but another opportunity to keep working, keep producing, keep staying awake under electric light. Yet as modern life spins faster, a strange nostalgia has begun to take root, a yearning for something slower, softer, older. Many people today are rediscovering the wisdom of natural cycles. Farmers are planting by moonlight again. Urban dwellers are darkening their rooms, turning off their phones, and trying to find what our ancestors once had without even thinking about it. Balance. The science of circadian rhythm, our body's internal clock, now confirms what medieval people lived instinctively. Human beings are built for rhythm. The brain, the skin, even our cells respond to cycles of light and darkness. When we ignore them, we feel it. Anxiety, fatigue, sleeplessness, and the dull ache of disconnection. When we return to them, even in small ways, a morning walk, a candle at night, a meal eaten slowly, we feel something shift. We remember what it means to move in harmony with the world. In medieval villages, the night was never truly dead. It was a time of half-silence, when dreams and prayers and quiet work mingled. But the people of that time never saw sleep as wasted time. It was a sacred interval between labors, a conversation between the body and the soul. In their first sleep they rested deeply. In the watch between sleeps they reflected, prayed, or whispered by the fire. When they woke again, they were not groggy but renewed, ready for the second half of the night's journey. Today we live in a state of near constant wakefulness. Our rooms glow at midnight with blue light, our bodies confused by the endless day. We've replaced the lull of crickets and wind with the hum of engines and screens. But somewhere inside the old rhythm still beats, faintly beneath the noise. It waits for darkness, for silence, for the chance to reset. Some people are beginning to listen, Digital detox retreats, slow-living movements, and circadian wellness routines are small but growing attempts to reconnect. Even science in its most advanced form points backward, to firelight, to early dawn, to the natural alternation of rest and activity. What seems modern is in truth ancient. To rediscover old rhythms is not about rejecting the present. It's about remembering that technology was meant to serve us, not rule us. It's about realizing that the clock on your wrist is only a shadow of a greater timekeeper, the one inside you. In the quiet of a darkened room, when the hum of devices finally fades and the mind begins to drift, you may feel that ancient pulse again. You might even glimpse for a moment the world as it was when time moved slower, when night and day, work and rest, body and spirit were all part of the same unbroken song. The medieval world was far from perfect, yet its people knew something we've almost forgotten. That sleep was not just a necessity, but a rhythm, a returning, a small rehearsal for death and rebirth. To rediscover that is to remember what it means to be human, to live not against time but with it. So perhaps the next great revolution in sleep won't come from a pill or a gadget or a new study. Perhaps it will come from something much simpler, from turning off the lights, closing the screens, and letting ourselves fall once more into the ancient pattern of night and day. Because in rediscovering old rhythms, we rediscover ourselves, what we lost and what we can reclaim. There was a time when sleep was not an interruption of life, but a part of its sacred rhythm. The medieval world understood something we have long forgotten, that rest is not merely the absence of work, but the presence of peace. Night was a time to retreat from noise, to listen to silence, to dream with purpose. People did not chase productivity through the dark. They trusted the turning of the earth to tell them when to rise and when to rest. Today, that ancient rhythm lies buried beneath electric light and endless schedules. We measure our days not by the sun or the seasons, but by alarms and notifications. The modern mind, always lit, always connected, has lost the art of slowing down. Sleep, once revered, is now negotiated, stolen from or postponed, squeezed into the margins of ambition. We lie awake under artificial stars, glowing screens replacing the moon, our bodies pleading for the stillness our ancestors once honored. But to speak of what we have lost is also to glimpse what might yet be reclaimed. The body remembers. Deep within us, the ancient clock still ticks, the circadian rhythm that hums beneath the pulse of every living thing. When we allow ourselves to listen, it guides us back toward balance. To wake with the dawn, to eat when the body hungers, to rest when it grows weary, these are not luxuries. They are acts of remembrance, of returning to the oldest wisdom we know. We cannot return to the medieval night, nor should we. But we can learn from it. We can rebuild our relationship with darkness, not as something to fear, but as something that heals. We can rediscover the sacred hour, that quiet space between first and second sleep, between noise and dream, and fill it not with screens, but with reflection. In that stillness, we may once again find the clarity that centuries of light have obscured. What we have lost is not simply sleep, it is reverence. Reverence for time, for silence, for the limits that make life whole. We were not meant to be endless, tireless, or always awake. The human spirit was shaped in the pattern of rise and rest, of effort and ease. To live well is to honor both, the sun that drives us forward, and the night that draws us inward. And so the path to reclaiming rest begins not with technology or self-help, but with humility. It begins when we admit that the body is wiser than the clock. That progress without pause is not progress at all. That sometimes to move forward we must stop, long enough to listen, long enough to breathe. Imagine it. A world where evenings grow quiet again, where we allow ourselves to be still without guilt, where sleep is not the enemy of success but its foundation. A world where dreams are once again seen as messages, not malfunctions. Where the night becomes, as it once was, a teacher. This is what we can reclaim, and not the past itself, but the wisdom that lived within it. The understanding that to rest is to trust the world to turn without us. The courage to let go of control, to surrender to sleep, to remember that the sun will rise again, as it always has. Perhaps that is the final lesson of all this, that in sleep we do not lose time. We return to it. We rejoin the cycle that every generation before us has known, the pulse of life that moves not by the clock, but by the heart. So tonight, when the world hums with artificial urgency, and the clock insists on more, remember this: once long ago, people listened to the rhythm of stars. They worked by light. They rested by dark. And in that balance they found harmony. We can find it again, because sleep was never just about closing the eyes. It was about opening the soul,